good Tuesday, a good Tuesday Tea-ology to you today. I hope that this finds you well. The royal we, that's me, are drinking today Yorkshire Gold by Taylor's. This is one of the mainstay teas, kind of a everyday, every time black tea. It's rich, it's strong, it's just good. And it's not, remember that good tea does not have to be expensive. Now, there are more expensive teas, especially as you buy loose leaf and stuff, but uh, having a discriminating tea taste that does not have to break the bank. You can get these Yorkshire tea for, you get it in quantity, and it's a little less 7 or 10 cents per tea bag. Mm. So, what a wonderful time to be alive. You can experience all the joys of good tea for practically pennies. Uh, Hope that you're well. And our theology today, we continue to talk about the wonderful work of Christ, and we're at that climax of redemption. We've spent a while now scratching the surface about the death of Christ, the meaning of the death of Christ, the accomplishment of his atoning death. And we're going to move then to the resurrection, for these two things very much go together. And without the resurrection, the saving work of Christ would not be complete. We could not be saved apart from the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And we will talk about that and about more as we go on. But before we get there, we do want to pause and take a moment for that pause that lies between the death and resurrection of Jesus. For he died on a Friday. We remember that as Good Friday, and he rose on a Sunday, which we call Easter Sunday. And there is this. He was 3 days in the tomb. Now you say 3 days, but there's only one day between these. Well, it is the inclusive counting of the times of the culture there. So Friday he died and is placed in the tomb, and Saturday he rises from the tomb, and so those two are both included in the 3 days. There's a full day. I'm sorry, Sunday he rises from the tomb. There's a full day Saturday, and more. Um, Liturgical high church kind of traditions will refer to this as Holy Saturday, the Saturday he was in the tomb, and it was a time of depression, despair for the disciples, for the followers of Jesus who loved him, for it seemed that their hope had vanished. Their Lord had been killed. The disciples were in fear and time of grief and mourning. Uh, but it is that pause of waiting before the joy of the resurrection. So let's talk about Holy Saturday, what we may take from this. So to read from the Gospel of Matthew, uh, after Jesus had died, when it was evening, this is Matthew 27, verse 57. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who also was a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him, and Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen shroud and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had cut in the rock. And he rolled a great stone to the entrance of the tomb and went away. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were there, sitting opposite the tomb. Simple account of the burial of Jesus. This is the key point where Joseph of Arimathea comes in, and you may have heard of him if you have heard the story of Good Friday and Easter. So he is a follower of Jesus, and he is a wealthy man, and so his gift to the Lord is the use of his tomb. And as a rich man, he has a high class tomb. So it is cut into the rock and has a place for the body to be set. And then what you would do um, to prevent grave robbers, wild animals, anyone from interfering with the tomb. So they would prepare these tombs. It's cut into the rock, and there would be a great big stone, and it would kind of be set a little bit above, so it had to kind of roll down a little bit into place, and then it would be, you know. One man or a few could get it rolling since you're rolling it downhill. But once it was down there, getting it out would be much more difficult because now you had to fight the incline when the stone was in place. So it was a sort of door, but a door that's much easier to close than it is to open. And so Jesus is laid in the tomb. The stone is rolled in, and the woman sit there opposite the tomb in sorrow. There's a strong sense of finality when you think about the stone rolling in front of the tomb. It's over. The door is shut. And that's why the joy of Easter is that wonderful explosion of surprise, of victory, of the overturning of death. But we will come to that. Interestingly, also, Matthew goes on to say the next day, so now we're on Holy Saturday, that is, after the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, Sir, we remember how that impostor said, while he was alive, after 3 days I will rise. Therefore, order the tomb to be made secure until the third day, lest his disciples go and steal him away and tell the people, He has risen from the dead, and the last fraud will be worse than the first. Pilate said to them, You have a guard of soldiers. Go make it as secure as you can. So they went and made the tomb secure by sealing the stone and setting a guard. So if the note of finality of the stone wasn't enough, now the tomb is guarded with soldiers there, and the seal, which sort of represented the authority of the worldly powers there, and so it is shut, and those things will, of course, completely fail to stop God's purposes. So one of the things, maybe the first thing we can draw from thinking about Holy Saturday, is the inability of all the powers arrayed against God to stop his plans. That the stone cannot keep him down, the guards, the seal, none of this can prevent God's powerful redeeming work. Death itself cannot keep its hold on the Son of God. So when we face those powers that are arrayed against God's purposes in this world, the resurrection, when we remember what things were like on Holy Saturday, the resurrection gives us a confidence. All of the enemies of God cannot stop his purposes, cannot prevent God's victory. It is certain. In fact, all of these things are going to, especially the human efforts, the soldiers and the seal, are going to look incredibly silly in the end. There is a supreme foolishness to all opposition to God and his purposes, and that will be clear in the end. But there is a question that people ask, and we should think about. So in these 3 days, where was Jesus? And this leads us into theology of life and death. In a sense, a very important sense, we may say he was in the tomb. Jesus himself puts things in that perspective there. When he predicts his death and resurrection, he uses the image of Jonah, who was swallowed by the great fish and then 3 days later emerged on shore. And Jesus predicted his death and resurrection, saying, just as Jonah was 3 days in the belly of the fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days in the earth. And so that is a way of saying that the body matters. We're not what you call Gnostics who have a purely spiritual sense of the self and no sense of the importance of the body. No, we are embodied beings, and God the Son became man in the person of Jesus Christ, and so he can say of himself that the Son of Man will be 3 days in the earth. And that, of course, is a reference to his body that is buried in the tomb. And it was bodily that he rose again. But there is more to it than that, and that is that as Christians we understand that we are not solely physical beings, but also spiritual beings. Um, there are, of course, cultural ideas that kind of wrap around this, and we want to be careful not to let them all inform us. But that nonetheless, it is right to speak of the body and the soul, and um, that when a person dies, in a very real sense, they are not there anymore. We look at the body and we can see no one is at home. They have gone elsewhere. And of course, the atheist has to say, they as a person or so are simply no longer exist. We don't believe that. We believe they continue to exist, but they are not there anymore. And the Christian hope is for those who belong to Christ, eventually of the resurrection of the body. But what about in the meantime? What about in between times, where where was uh, where was Jesus in that sense in between? And this is where we want to make a distinction with some ideas that have come up, and that is ideas that Jesus um, went to hell, or in some sense. That is so you may come across the term the harrowing of hell, or something like that. And indeed, in old, very old Christian statement of faith, you will read in the Apostles' Creed, he descended into hell, and it is a matter of debate what that was meant to be saying there. There is definitely a case for saying that it was just another way of saying that he died, but there are various other interpretations that people have had throughout history of that phrase. And so some people have this idea of him going to hell, and that one might take that from First Peter chapter 3, verses 18 and following. We read, "For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey, when God's patience waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being prepared," and so on. Uh, what is this going and preaching to the spirits in prison? So there is something going on here. But it is not it is not about suffering in hell. Hell as a place of punishment is an end times thing, and uh, whether in the in between times those who don't know God are in a place of suffering seems uh, seems likely, and the parable of Lazarus and the rich man certainly points in that direction. But what we don't see is any notion of that in Jesus in between. We do see there a preaching. And we often think of preaching as preaching to convince someone to save their souls. That doesn't seem to be what First Peter is talking about. Rather, in First Peter, it seems to be a proclamation of victory. And this is a difficult passage, but the idea would seem to be that at some point following his death, Christ declared his victory to the angelic spirits who were imprisoned due to their disobedience and rebellion in times past. That would seem to be what First Peter was talking about, not about a going to release faithful people who were in suffering or something, not about a going to convert the souls of dead men and women, but rather a going to declare his victory to angelic beings who were in prison. But the main statement we can say about where was Jesus in the meantime is what Jesus himself said he was going to be doing, uh, and that is um, noted in his conversation with the thieves on the cross. When Jesus was being crucified, there were two criminals, one on either side, being crucified, and one of them was mocking, one of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." And he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he said to him, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." That is where Jesus went in the meantime, in paradise. Uh, and so the thief on the cross went to be with him. For those who trust in Jesus get to go and be with him when they die. And so one of the things that this in between time between the cross and resurrection points to for us is one more reinforcement of the Christian hope of what happens to the believer in the time between the death of our bodies and the resurrection at the last day when Christ comes again. And that is that those who belong to Jesus go and get to go and be with him in paradise. It is better than this life. It is still not the ultimate joys and eternal joy to come, but it is paradise. And that is where Jesus went in the meantime, and that is where his people will go when they leave this life to go and be with him. Um, but we need to continue next time to talk about the resurrection. For Jesus, he died, he went to paradise, he returned, and then he ascended into heaven, and believers go to be with him. It's a complicated picture, but it is a wonderful picture. This is the good news of what God has done for us and what we can, the hope and joy that we can have in him. May the Lord bless you, draw you close to himself, care for you in every way. Take care.